recent IPCC report warned us that the world has just over a decade to get the climate change under control. Everyone needs to help out, especially the government, and that's why the Environmental Stewardship Committee is hosting this forum. Environmental issues used to be bipartisan. In 2008, John McCain campaigned as a leader in diminishing carbon emissions. But then Citizens United came along and gave large companies the opportunity to buy political influence so that they would help them to pollute more. We invited every candidate running for state and local office on our ballot to this forum. And those that said that they couldn't come, we offered to read their written responses to 3 questions, environmental questions we sent them, but no one replied to that email. So we're especially pleased that John Perkins and George Wolfe are willing to talk with us today. Jeannine Lake is on her way. She had tire issues, but she'll be here, and we're also expecting Charles Johnson. Our moderator is Dr. Jeff Phillips, the director of Hanover's Engineering Program, and he's a recognized power industry expert with over 30 years in the global energy industry. Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, everyone, and I especially want to thank the Environmental Stewardship Committee for organizing this event. Over the break, I was reading a book of speeches that the great American historian David McCullough has given over the years, and one of them was a speech to a college, probably much like Hanover. And one of the comments that he made really resonated with me. He said, most people think that their duty as a citizen ends if they in voting. If you vote, that makes you a good citizen. And he said, absolutely not. The founding fathers knew that in order for a democracy to thrive and really function well, required an educated electorate. And that's what you're doing today, is you're seeking to become an educated electorate. And I congratulate you for doing so. All right, here's how this is going to work. So I have prepared 4 questions. I already let them know what it was in advance, so hopefully we will get cogent responses. We'll go in order. I'll start with Dr. Wolfe with the first question, and then with the second question, Mr. Johnson, and then as Ms. Lake and Charles Johnson come, then we'll work on that. So, but once my 4 questions are done, we're still going to have time, and so that's where you come in. So some of you might have already gotten these little index cards. If you don't have one and you would like to ask a question, we'd ask you to fill these out. We'll collect them about 2 questions in after you've heard some from the candidates. And then what we're going to try to do, because we probably won't have time, we have to end at 5 because they have other events they have to get to. What we're going to do is that the Environmental Stewardship Committee will kind of sort through these and try to categorize them, and we'll try to get at least the top topics asked before 5 o'clock. So with that, and if anyone needs a little card, just raise your hand, and I think we have some helpers who will help you do that. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first question. And Dr. Wolfe will go with you, and then Mr. Perkins, you'll follow. You'll each have 3 minutes. And the question is, what are your strongest qualifications for the office for which you are running, and why do you want to be elected? So.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so glad that these kind of forums are happening around the state. You know, when you watch these half-minute ads on television, all you get is kind of a little piece of propaganda that isn't always really accurate. The best way to get to know candidates is to be involved in the political process, is to be a part of these kind of community meet and greet forums and so forth. So I'm really happy to see this happening. It's been happening around the state. It's a real good sign. I'm running for the office of Secretary of State. Secretary of State is the chief election officer in the state and is in charge of election protocol and so forth. You know, I spent 37 years teaching in higher education, and I have my degree in administration. I was the director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies at Ball State University for 4 years, and then I was also outreach coordinator for many years after that. Had a great deal of experience bringing people together, finding common ground to build trust and cooperation. And I think that's what we need in the political arena. We have a highly negative, adversarial political environment, which I think people are tired of. And I think I can bring to it a new approach and help to change the political culture from an adversarial, negative one to one where people come together on common ground, build trust and cooperation. I also like the idea in higher education of what's called the marketplace of ideas. That at the university, we present the marketplace of ideas on the table. We bring to it, people bring to that from various sources, various stakeholders bring to the table the marketplace of ideas, and then collectively we decide what ideas are best so we can move forward. And we need to do that with the state. Rather than one party fighting against another party, we need to decide what are the ideas which are going to help us advance and move forward collectively, and then we all come together and do it together. I have spent time complimenting my opponents who are running for Secretary of State, and it kind of shocks them. Jim Harper, for example, the Democratic candidate, has emphasized election security, and I applaud him for that. We have some different ideas on how to approach that. I believe we should move more and more towards paper ballots, towards a vote by mail system, rather than relying so much on technology, because the technology is vulnerable to hacking. It relies on the infrastructure of the electric grid, and that can be brought down in ways that disrupt our election. There's a lot of vulnerability in the process. Hi, Jeannine, come on in. This is another person I support. Come on in. There has been a lot of illegal purging of names from the voter rolls. And it's been based on the assumption, just because you haven't voted in the past couple of elections, it must mean you're not around anymore. But that assumption is false, and I think it's discriminatory, especially against people who are in lower income brackets. I would never purge anybody from a voter roll as Secretary of State unless there is documentation that they were deceased or moved out of state. We need to have same-day registration. The states which have the highest voting number of people coming, voter turnout, have same-day registration. So I'm running out of time. I got a whole list. I have a website, wolfforindiana.com. You can go there and you'll get, I have 6 platform videos, one on gerrymandering, which is a real problem. I believe only a Secretary of State from outside the 2 major parties can deal and correct that problem, because both parties have been guilty of those kind of injustices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wolfe. And next up we have John Perkins, who's a candidate for the Indiana State Senate. You too have 3 minutes.
Better talk fast then.
Okay.
I think the question was why I feel I'm the most qualified. I was first elected to public office in 1972. I was the youngest one in the state of Indiana ever elected to a city council. That's when voting age was 21. Spent 20 years on the Jerseyville City Council, 3 years as Clark County Commissioner, and those 23 years of service, I'd missed 0 meetings. I think if you run for office, it's like a job application. They expect you to show up for work every day and do what you're supposed to do. I believe experience counts, and I've said that during my campaign. I've probably written 100 or more ordinances and resolutions on the city council and as a county commissioner. I understand the legislative process. I majored in government economics at Indiana University, Bloomington. I've served on numerous boards over the years. Plan Commission, Urban Pride Zone, Board of Works and Safety, Gaming Commission, Solid Waste, Drainage Board, Redevelopment. Some of the things that I was most proud of, and probably were several ordinances I was recognized by the Humane Association of the United States. I'm a great animal rights person. Wrote several ordinances about that, in which I was recognized by the Humane Society. I believe in an active agenda, not a passive agenda. I've dealt with environmental problems in the city of Jeffersonville and also Clark County. We have some serious problems in southern Indiana, particularly those of us along the Ohio River. Jeffersonville was one of those problems, as is other cities. There's such a thing, if you don't understand it, it's called a combined sewer system. What that means is rainwater and sewage go into the same pipe. And if the sewer plant can't handle that, it overflows into the Ohio River. And that's a real problem. Jeff is working on that, as is Clark County, some other areas. That's one thing I want to do. The one main reason I'm running is there are things I want to change. And if you believe in change, you have to be a part of change. I've spoken to lots of groups, some favorably and some not so favorably, but I believe in what I believe in. You know, I believe in health care for all. Health care is a right, it's not a privilege. I believe in a woman's right to choose. I lost my wife in October, it'll be a year this month. She made some health decisions that I didn't agree with, but it was her body. She made those decisions. She wanted to go to Mexico for alternative treatment, we did. I believe in workers' rights. If you know a term, it's called the right to work. What that means is you can go to work, you don't have to join a union, you don't have to pay union dues.
30 seconds.
Thank you. But if you have a grievance, the union still has to represent you. If the contract gets you a raise, you get the raise, but you haven't helped pay for the negotiations for the raise. So health care and workers' rights are two of my main platform items. There are a lot more, but those are two. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, if y'all want, just to save time, we've got those two things on the tables are microphones. And so if you want to just sit there and talk, then we don't have to do the shuffle.
Okay.
So without further ado, then I'm going to turn the forum over to Ms. Jeannine Lee Lake, who is a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives. And the question, which we're going to start out with, we have 3 minutes. What are your strongest qualifications for the office for which you are running, and why do you want to be elected?
Well, I thank you guys for letting me come today. My name is Jeannine Lee Lake, and I'm running for U.S. Congress in the 6th District. I'm excited to be today in Hanover. I've been here a couple times to Madison now and Jefferson County, and I feel very at home here. It's a great place to be. It's certainly a little bit more beautiful than Ball State. It could have something to do with y'all's endowment. But yeah, I decided to run for Congress, quite honestly, and I've told this story, so I guess I got to keep telling it no matter where I go. But I became very, very disenchanted after the November 2016 election. And it just kind of hurt my heart, some of the things that were taking place during that time. The tone of the country's leaders, people in Congress, I didn't feel that they were making bold and courageous decisions. And I don't mean that generically, I mean that specifically in a lot of cases. Everything from what we're going to be talking about today, the environment, and the decision not to engage with the Paris Agreement. Everything from that, I think I call them the deniers in power who say that climate change is not real. Those are some of the things that are just kind of mind-baffling to me, mind-blowing to me, despite the fact that 97% of scientists agree, that climate change is real. And that doesn't mean that it's bipartisan. But the real reason why I got in the beginning was because my daughter asked me if the President of the United States hated Black people. And that came after a series of other conversations where she asked if he didn't like women. And I have to be honest, those are the questions in the dialogue that she had before me. And she's a senior. She goes to the Indian Academy for Gifted and Talented Students, Indian Academy for Science, Mathematics, and Humanities, I guess is the technical term. And, she just had heard so many derogatory things, fat, ugly dogs, horse mouth today. I guess that came horse face today, the new thing, but she hadn't heard that then. But, just going into womanhood, she was a teenager, and some of those things that had concerned her. And so, I looked forward to the future, and I decided that, if she's going to grow up as an adult and as an African-American young woman, she's biracial, all my children are foster to adopt, that I wanted her to be able to go in with the attitude that I had, which is that I could do anything I wanted to do. And even though I grew up in the Reagan era, I guess, coming of age, I also believe that despite the fact that maybe we have different political ideologies at times, we do all really love the country. And we're all moving toward that with a common goal. I consider myself a moderate. Do I got to stop talking? All right. I consider myself a moderate, so I can kind of bend, to come to the table and listen as much as I possibly can to all issues. But I do have a problem with someone if I think they're the leader of a free world and they are truly, it seems, hell-bent almost on destroying our nation, whether that's abroad or domestic. So anyways, that's kind of the reason why I ran. I've never run for political office before, but I've been a journalist for 30 years. I'm pretty smart, and I'm engaged, and I love people and being around people. So I'm really excited to be here and learn more about the environmental issues.
Okay, well, if Mr. Johnson does arrive, we'll give him maybe a 2-minute chance to catch up. In the meantime, we're going to actually go into environmental issues. So my second question for you, and you each will have 2 minutes to answer, and I'm going to start this time with Mr. Perkins, and then we'll go kind of in the order that you're seated there towards me. So the second question is, what do you feel is the biggest environmental issue facing southeastern Indiana, and what would you do to address it if elected?
Well, first of all, I live on the Ohio River in Bethlehem, Indiana. One of the biggest problems is with an outfit called Orsenco, which writes the water pollution standards for 8 different states. The Ohio River, until recently, has become cleaner. If those regulations are slackened, that's going to be a problem. As I said earlier, one of the big problems along the Ohio River from Clark County on up through Switzerland County, which is my district, is a problem that is created by combined sewers. I spoke that earlier. Because combined sewers are what they are. They're stormwater and they're sewage. And no plant can handle a 3-inch rain going through their sewer plants. There has to be a way to separate storm from sanitary. I'm a firm believer in the environment, and sometimes I quote him, and that's Jerry Brown, when he says that, we live on spaceship, Earth. And that's true. This is the only planet we have, and we have to take care of it. The problem with a lot of elected officials is it's not that they don't understand the problem. It's not that they don't understand how to solve the problem. The real problem comes down is, are they willing to pay the economic and political costs to solve the problems? Come to a county council meeting and watch them if somebody even brings up the term wheel tax, which would be $25 a year to help pave roads or do whatever. Politicians, elected officials, cringe if they have to actually increase revenue to solve problems. I don't have that problem. I've balanced 20 city budgets as a councilman, and when money has to be spent to correct a problem, you have to spend the money to correct the problem. It's as simple as that.
Ms. Lake.
Yes. I don't know that there's one particular area, because it seems as if that's that's putting more weight here or there, and I guess it depends on what you're dealing with. Whether it's air, land, or water pollution, those are things that I'm concerned about. The World Health Organization says that 1 in 4 deaths are due to poor environmental issues. It seems as if to me we have more children with asthma than growing up now than ever before. We do have problems with jet fuel being, dumped anywhere, legally, that people want to do that. But particularly since, I don't know if you all know that I'm running against Greg Pence, Mike Pence's brother, and he is an alum here from here in Hanover. But he's had quite a bit of problems in Columbus, which is where he used to own a business. And I don't mean this, I'm only telling this story, not pejoratively, but because it is an environmental issue. There's $20 million in taxpayer monies that us Hoosiers had to incur because he was part of a business called Kill Brothers, and they had some tanks that were left over and not properly disposed of. They had filed bankruptcy through the Pence family filed bankruptcy, and because of that, there was leakage. They actually had a big tank that floated down the river. People have been sick in Garden City. It's been devastating to the people of Indiana and the people in this part of the state. I believe that there needs to be stricter regulations on factories. I don't think that that's something that we can turn a blind eye to. I'm not the candidate to be paid off for anything and to look the other way. This is something that's very concerning to me, and so thank you.
Dr. Wolfe.
Thank you. Well, as a Green Party candidate, we're very interested in this transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy resources, wind, solar, geothermal, and so forth. There's been a lot of success stories around the state. If you drive to the Indianapolis airport, you see the large solar farm. If you drive up Route 65, you see the wind turbines. If you go to Ball State University converted to a geothermal system. There's a lot of interest in this kind of transitioning and conversion, but the transitioning has to be done with politicians and with the government that have a long-term vision. Politicians are real good at quick fixes, all right? Because for running for 2 years, 4 years, 3 years, or 4 years, or whatever is our term, we're real good at picking issues that we could fix quickly. So if you ask me about same-day registration, or if you ask me about making the election day a statewide holiday, I can fix that. You elect me Secretary of State, I can get that done in 2 years. But if you ask me about transitioning from fossil fuel, such as coal, for example, to renewable energy sources, solar, wind, geothermal, that's got to take place over a long period of time, 5, 10, 15 years. Politicians aren't real good at that because people aren't going to probably vote for me based on what I'm going to do 15 years from now, you see. So we need to have vision, we need to have visionary leaders, and we need to have government agencies that can kind of oversee these problems and these transitions so as to protect workers, so that workers don't get left out on the cold, and also to keep politicians like me from meddling in the process. That transitional aspect of moving from fossil fuel to renewable resources is, I think, the major issue. It's a broader issue because we also have recycling issues that we have to deal with. We have the air pollution and so forth, not simply fossil fuels. We have in Florida, we have the red tide algae problem, which is now we have the plastic waste dump in the Pacific Ocean. Big issues. And I'll wrap it up now saying that's the Green Party position. We have to look at it in a holistic way. Thank you.
All right. Before I move into the third question, if all of this now has prompted some ideas that you would like to ask a question of our candidates, if you've already filled out one of these little cards, I believe A couple of our assistants here will pick them up if you just want to hand them up. If you don't yet have a card, let them know and they'll get one to you. And this isn't the last call for questions. We'll do it again after we finish our fourth one. But okay, so we're going to go to question number 3. And let's see, we will start with, Ms. Lake. And then we'll go to Dr. Wolfe and then Mr. Perkins. And question number 3, very pertinent to what we just heard. The Clifton Creek coal power plant, also known as Indiana-Kentucky Electric, is just 3 miles from here. And it is one of Madison's largest employers and pays wages far above the local average. Are you in favor of allowing it to continue to operate as long as it meets current environmental regulations, or do you want it to be shut down?
Well, I'm assuming that there's a problem. If this person has asked this question, they followed this coal plant, and there's probably concerns about coal ash, which getting left over. I believe that I do support current legislation that are in laws that are already in place. So that's kind of a toughie, because it also means, that you would say that people that have these higher paying jobs, you don't want their jobs to be taken away in any way, shape, or form. We have to make sure that the environmental regulations that are already in place are being met. No, I'm sorry, I would say that, we need jobs. I'm not in favor of cutting jobs. I don't know enough about this particular situation, its history. I do apologize. I'll see if I can, look into more research. But to have higher paying jobs right now is a good thing. Our federal minimum wage is at $7.25 an hour. And, anytime that we need to get that up to $10 an hour. And at least, so just to say that we would cut jobs, and shut it down, and that just on its surface, just because I don't know enough about it, I wouldn't be able to say that I would agree with that particular question. So that's my answer. But I am concerned about coal ash.
Well, I'd like to answer that question by starting with what's happening up in Michigan City, Indiana. There are 2 coal plants there that are being slated for closing. But it's a transitional process that's going to take place over 5 and 10 years. Why is this happening? Well, to quote Nick Meyer, who's the spokesman for the utility, he says, renewable energy sources, including wind, solar, battery power storage technology, have become less expensive than coal to produce electricity. My point is, this is where the market forces are leading us. And we need to have a vision that cooperates with the market forces. If we don't, if we fight against them, we're going to have problems here in terms of the workers, in terms of all of a sudden plants closing. We can make a transition, as they are doing up in northern Michigan, from 5 or 10 years, so that workers can be offered early retirement programs, so that they can be have their retraining and so forth. And that would happen over a long period of time so that it would not detrimentally affect the workers. Another thing that bothers me is when I hear scientists and politicians and so forth talking about the impact of burning coal on the environment. They're always talking about the increase of carbon and so forth in the atmosphere. Very rarely do I hear them talking about the danger of those jobs. Coal mining is a dangerous job. You've heard stories, I'm sure, of accidents occurring in the coal mines and the coal miners dying. You've heard black lung disease. These are kind of things which it's a risky profession. We need to move into more cleaner energy so it's simply healthier for the workers, and we need to start paying people who put up solar panels with the same kind of wages that people who work in the risky, more dangerous jobs. If we don't have this kind of vision, we're going to run into the same kind of problems they have up in East Chicago, Indiana. East Chicago, Indiana, I was there, and the pollution that's occurred from the
chemical and petroleum industry have created lead contaminations in the soil, so that you have housing districts that have been closed. You have an elementary school that's virtually brand new that cannot be used because of lead contamination in the soil. And you have an entire neighborhood where the people cannot drink the water. They have to drink bottled water. I was up there last April. I become informed about that. So that's my answer of why we need to move forward with some vision in that regard.
Thank you. And Mr. Perkins.
Well, the answer to that question is no one wants to put anyone out of work. And I think it does have to be phased in. There's a power plant across the river from me on the Kentucky side that's transitioning over to natural gas, which is somewhat less polluting. I love it when some people in Washington, D.C. like to use the term clean coal. There's no such thing as clean coal, okay? Coal ash. When I was a county commissioner, we found out that our highway superintendent was using coal ash from a power plant in Louisville to spread on the roads when it was snowing. It came to our attention, though, that contained lead, arsenic, and other things that they were spreading on the road, and then, of course, would wash down through the sides of the road and into the Ohio River. Clifty Creek provides power for a large area of southern Indiana. You need the power plant. The jobs are one thing and the power is something else. No one wants to see their lights go down or have a brownout. I would support, as a state senator, incentives for this plant and other plants in Indiana to transfer over to renewables and not just natural gas. I was in Hawaii a couple years ago, and their goal within the next 20 years is to be wind and solar for the whole state of Hawaii. Those wind generators are something that we need to move to. I just paid more to get my license plates because I drive a hybrid vehicle. The state of Indiana, those in control, decided that they need to charge me more because I was using less gasoline and therefore wasn't paying enough in gas taxes. So that in order to make up the difference, if you have an electric car or a hybrid in the state of Indiana right now, when you go in to get your license plate, you get a little surprise. It's just a little thing that they ask you to pay. So not to close the plant, but certainly transfer to natural gas, and hopefully later on down the road, we won't even need to use those.
All right. Thank you, panel. Thank you, panel, for those answers. And now the final question before we turn it over to audience questions is a little bit longer, so bear with me. But as Professor Rogers said when she introduced me, environmental protection used to be a bipartisan issue. It was not the divisive issue that it is today. In fact, in 1970, President Richard Nixon, a Republican, created the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency by an executive order. So in order for environmental protections to be truly sustainable, they must enjoy bipartisan support, or they run the risk of being rescinded after the next election. On what issues do you believe you could work with a bipartisan coalition of elected officials to develop a consensus on how to address that environmental issue? Let's see, I guess we'll start with Dr. Brown, and we'll work the other way through the panel.
Dr. Wolfe.
Dr. Wolfe.
Yeah, it's with an E, by the way, on the end. By the way, in response to your remark about the hybrid vehicles, yes, the Secretary of State's office now has a division within it that oversees auto dealers and the automotive BMV, so forth program. So if I'm elected Secretary of State, you will not have to pay more for your hybrid vehicle, because we need to encourage that movement towards hybrid vehicles, particularly buses and so forth in towns where, with the advantage of hybrid vehicles is where you are driving more stop and go, as opposed to open road driving. Well, I think there's so many issues related to the environment, and they are bigger than the state of Indiana. You have this problem within politics where politicians are good with short-term fixes, but it's a difficult environment when you look at long-term politicians devoting toward long-term solutions. So you need an environmental protection agency which has some autonomy from the government to make sure that those plans for a long-term transition, which is what's necessary in the environment issues, can be held in place and fulfilled over that period of time. So rather than being one issue, I think if you look around the world and around our country, I mentioned the red tide issue now down in the Gulf. I mentioned the plastic waste in the Pacific. But there's a recycling issue I found that I just read an article where a lot of your recycled efforts, the recycled material is really, it's not being recycled, it's ending up in landfills. We need to do something to help the recycle industry to avoid that problem. Probably we're going to have to do what they do in Europe and Austria, for example, where I taught for a while. They actually had the citizens separated their glass from their aluminum, from their tin cans, from their paper and so forth before it was picked up. And that's probably something we need to go to get more citizen involvement in the whole recyclable effort, as opposed to putting everything in one bag. What was the other?
Time's up.
Is that about time? Okay.
Yep.
Saved by the bell.
Okay, Ms. Lake.
Yes, I am definitely in favor of something like that because obviously since this current administration, again, part of the deniers in power, I believe, have been there. They rolled back and cut back and destroyed so many of the things that President Obama had put into place. And good things for the environment, good things for the future. We thought that these things made sense to most people, and it's distressing to think that now we're kind of not only going backwards, but we're starting over with so many good initiatives and programs. I do think it's important that if going forward, that it would be a bipartisan coalition. And one of the things that is the hallmark, I believe, of my campaign has been one of my favorite colors is purple. And the reason why is because red and blue, no offense to you as the Green Party or the Libertarian Party, but in terms of the voting public being more red and blue, bringing together to equal kind of the purple party, at least definitely with environmental issues. We have got to put party aside and partisan politics aside to be able to come together with putting our future and our children's futures first and foremost, and not like you said, George, not reliant upon the next administration that will change something and. Because it's a long-term issue. It's not these are not short-term issues. I read something just on the other day that was talking about by the time it's 2050 is here, in 30 years, there's the sea level, the water level. I mean, it's almost to the point where it's already irreversible in many areas. And it was talking about the Mediterranean. So if you want to go take this beautiful stroll down Venice in the canal, you might want to do it now, because if you're young, you might not get a chance to in 30 years. So we have to be looking forward, and we have to be looking forward in a way that is not partisan and more people.
Thank you. Mr. Perkins.
Who would have thought in 2018 that Richard Nixon looks better than he did in 73? I mean, the EPA used to mean something. And now we have a president that's appointed people that don't believe in the EPA and don't believe in pollution. I think the question was coming to consensus and working across the aisle. When I was city councilman and also when I was commissioner, it was a bipartisan. And most of the time, we would discuss, sometimes publicly and sometimes having a beer after a meeting, and we would come to consensus. A consensus, I think Benjamin Franklin said a consensus is when nobody gets what they want. And that's probably true. But at the same time, you should not ever give up your basic principles just to get along and come to some sort of decision. Sometimes you have to fight, and I've fought in the past and I'll fight in the future. I've dealt with the EPA on several different levels, and I used to have a lot of faith in them in that they would make sure that things were followed. And now I'm concerned about that. As a state senator, there's not much I can do about the EPA nationally, but as far as the state is concerned, if I could come to a consensus of opinion with other state senators and some state representatives, that doesn't mean that the EPA for the state of Indiana cannot be strong and doing what needs to be done. But I had a good friend who's now a Republican state senator that was on the city council with me years ago, and we would discuss and we would come to some mutual agreement. So I have no problem working across the aisle. Sometimes it was painful. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got several questions in here. I think what I'm going to do is maybe limit, since we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to limit it to a 1-minute response from each of you so we can get through as many of these as we can. The first one is related to climate change. How will you make climate change big businesses' problem? In other words, how will you make them care economically? And I guess whoever wants to start, I'll let you go.
I will.
All right, so 1 minute.
You hit them in the pocketbook. You have to make it economically unavailable, particularly through tax incentives. I've dealt with tax incentives to attract business. That can also be used to punish. I hate to use the word punish, but let's face it, some corporations are not environmentally gifted. So as a state senator, what I would do is, those that are doing wrong, you punish them. You know, if you want to get their attention, you hit them in the pocketbook, and that will get their attention.
Okay.
I pretty much agree. Just reward the good guys who care about the environment and are doing things right. There are companies that are doing things right. And to penalize those that are unwilling or, unwilling to meet the regulations or to engage with those who have knowledge and to listen to the scientists that are saying that these things are real issues. So that's pretty much it.
Yes, there's a business division within the Secretary of State's office, and I can be a person which would help to work with some of the ideas which have already been presented here to encourage businesses to start that favor the use of renewable energy sources. I don't like discouraging. I don't like punishing, as Jeannine said, but sometimes if you simply move in the direction where you're encouraging businesses and rewarding them for moving towards renewable energy sources, that a lot can be done, and the Secretary of State can have a lot of impact on that. I think we also need to educate people that climate change doesn't mean simply the temperature's going up. The models show that what we have are more extremes in weather conditions. So if the storms and so forth, the fires that we're having more and more, those extremes in weather conditions are what the models show, not that just all of a sudden we're going to have warmer winters or warmer summers or whatever.
All right, thank you. Okay, second question. Where do you stand on new laws that are being created to stop the purchase, planting, spreading of invasive plant species? So, anyone want to jump on invasive plant species?
Well, I've seen the kudzu, and I know that some plants that were brought in at the turn of the century for a gala, a dinner in New Orleans, spread to the waterways, are now clogging the waterways. I think that a person has to be aware of, is the environment permissive enough to let some of these plant species get out of hand? I think that that's something that certain state agencies should have the control over. I don't know exactly what species you might be talking about, but I think that anything brought in that's not native to Indiana has to be looked at, because you don't know what's going to happen 10 or 20 years down the road.
There's a lot of effort now, just to restore ecological systems in the state to a prairie ecosystem. I know that's been done up near Muncie. The creator of Garfield has been very much interested in that. And
Jim
he's
Davis.
restored, Davis, what's his first name?
Jim Davis.
Jim Davis, sorry. I don't read Garfield as much as I should. But very much said. Right across the street from where I live is used to be a beautiful woods, and now it's simply been invaded by honeysuckle. It's been ruined. And I know that there's a problem with carp, trying to prevent it from getting into the Great Lakes, an invasive species. So we have to take real strong measures to prevent those kind of environmental disasters, which are waiting to happen unless we have legislation to do something about it.
I'm in agreement with these gentlemen.
Okay, all right. Well, with that, then we can move on to another question. Let's see. So these two are somewhat similar, so I'm going to ask them together. One is, what is your stance on working to implement a carbon tax? This is in Indiana, but I guess in this Lake's case it would be for the U.S. And then, in the time that you have, how do you plan to aid Indiana residents in transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable resources, or reusable resources?
Well, one thing is not to punish people, as the state of Indiana, the legislature has done by using solar or wind power. And it used to be you could sell it back onto the grid and get some of your investment back. And now, for some reason, those in control in Indianapolis are punishing those people that go to solar or go to wind. Where I live in Bethlehem, Indiana, I get about a 12-mile-an-hour wind all the time. I could generate all the electricity that I use in my home with either a few solar panels or a wind turbine. But right now, the state of Indiana is discouraging, not encouraging people to use alternate energy sources.
Carbon tax, or how do we do the transition from fossil fuels?
Well, one of the things that I've learned that since I've been running is that there's a lot of things that I know, and there's a lot of things I don't know. I don't know enough about this particular issue to really comment on it in a way that needs it. It's certainly a complex and comprehensive issue, and it involves everybody. So that would be something that I would like to research a little bit more. I never like to say, I'm not one of those people that has to know the answer to everything, because one of the things I know that with 19 counties in the 6th district, there's some things that I just don't know, and I don't know enough about it to be able to feel like I could have an educated answer. And so I think I'm going to.
Well, I don't think carbon taxes should be a commodity that's traded among companies. I have so many carbon credits, so, I don't need them, so I'll sell them to somebody else so they can pollute a little bit more than I'm doing. So, I mean, that's almost like Bitcoin or one of those things that they do these days. So I don't
I've got to trade your time to Dr. Wolfe.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's a much more positive approach to help to facilitate the transition. It's going to happen anyway. The market forces, as pointed out by the quote from Nick Meyer from Michigan City, the market forces are leading us in that direction anyway. If we don't go cooperate with the market forces, we're going to have problems locally. So we need to cooperate with those market forces. Maybe tax incentives, maybe tax increases on certain things are one way of helping to nudge us in that direction. If they aren't necessary, then they aren't necessary. But we have to come to terms with the reality that that's where the market forces are leading us, and we need to implement long-term visionary programs to facilitate the transition and have compassion for the workers. Use a compassionate approach so that people just aren't left out in the cold. They're going to be left out of the cold if we do nothing, because the market forces are leading us there anyway.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so we have time for one last question, and I think this is a good one to end on. Thank you for whoever wrote this one. How do you plan to decrease the negative mood in government and create a more beneficial environment for Americans? How do we get out of this negativity that we're in today?
Well, I like that kind of question because I was in peace and conflict studies, and that's what I. You have to understand that peace is not a static state or condition. It is an ongoing process you have to invest in, and we have to help people understand that you're going to get more accomplished if you first build trust and cooperation and find common ground, rather than taking on the most contentious, divisive issues in the beginning. That was what was done with this administration in Washington. Took on the most divisive issues in the beginning, health care and so forth, and it got very little done and created a poisoned environment. So we need to work in just the opposite way. We need to start with issues that we have common ground on and build trust and cooperation. We also need to understand that there are 3 different definitions of violence. There's physical violence, psychological violence, and structural violence. We all know what physical violence is. Psychological violence is the violence of bullying, intimidation, offensive rhetoric, and so forth. That's what you hear a lot in the political arena today. Structural violence is the violence of discrimination and oppression. The roots of physical violence are in psychological and structural violence. And we have to address those problems first before we can expect to reduce the violence in our cities and in our schools.
Thank you, Dr. Wolfe. Ms. Lake.
Well, my husband is a pastor, and my dad's a pastor. I had 2 grandfathers who were also pastors, and I'm a person of faith. One of the things that we have as our hallmark is that you can't antagonize and evangelize at the same time. You can't stir people up and tell them how terrible they are and, just how terrible the situation is, and then expect them to come your way. So I do agree, even though I don't have a degree in peace and conflict studies. I have a degree in journalism. But
There are a lot of people that are good at it that don't know what it is.
Okay, I hope so. So, I do think it's important. The environment is toxic right now. Like I said, I'm a person that prays, but I also believe in policy, and I believe in changing leadership at the top. And so I believe that's what it's going to take in this situation. And I believe that the apple does fall from the tree, and that we have to be, led by people with good morals and with a good character. And I'm hoping that Congress is changed here in the next 20 days.
I think the way to do that is through personal relationships. In Washington, it used to be that senators and Congress people, they would have dinners together, the families would get together, the kids would play softball together. When I was on the council and worked with people on the other side of the aisle, we socialized. You got to know each other as a person. And once you understand the person, then you could deal with the differences you had politically. I found that to be very effective. Like I said, after a council meeting or after commissioners meeting, we'll have something to drink, have dinner, talk about whatever, and get to know each other, know the kids, know their dog's name. And once you had those personal relationships, it was a lot easier to deal with issues because you were dealing with the person that knew you and you knew them.
All right. Well, with that, will you join me in thanking this panel? It's not easy to do.